Hey friends, welcome back to another video. So one of my lovely viewers asked if I could make a video about what it's like to be in the Chapman computer science program, so that's what we're going to do. I guess this is going to be kind of like my computer science degree in 20 minutes. I don't know how long this video is, but you fill in the time. But I should preface this by saying, even though I only graduated a couple years ago, the program has changed since I graduated and was also changing a little bit while I was in it, so I'll make sure to cover what it was like for me and how it has changed since then. Before getting into specifics though, I want to talk about class structure at Chapman because it's different for engineering students and non-engineering students. That wasn't the case when I was enrolled, but it is now. So my requirements for graduation were 120 credits broken up into 45 to 46 general education credits and 72 major specific credits. And in terms of general education credits, there are specific categories that those credits are broken up into. The shared inquiries portion included an artistic inquiry, a natural science inquiry, a quantitative inquiry, a social inquiry, a values and ethics inquiry, and a written inquiry. In addition to the shared inquiries portion, there's also an exploration cluster. Now the terminology is a little bit weird because I think there are clusters inside of this cluster, but that's not the point. The exploration cluster includes a global citizen cluster, an inter or multidisciplinary cluster, which can also be covered by a second major or a minor, and then an FFC, a first year foundation course. My FFC ended up being one of my favorite classes and introduced me to some of my favorite books that I've ever read. But now FFCs are more tailored to your specific major, and in the case of the sciences, they'll take Grand Challenge initiatives. The Grand Challenges Initiative provides foundational skills in critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and teamwork. These are essential for success in nearly any STEM-related field or professional role. It's a 3-credit course with 3 additional 1-credit courses in the following semesters. The idea of the course is to get you to work with students that you may not otherwise get to work with on science-based projects, which I think is pretty cool. Now that I've covered how classes are structured, let's actually take a look at the classes that I took. Starting with my first semester at Chapman, I took Introduction to Psychology, my first year foundation course, Introduction to Computational Science, Pre-Calculus, and Computer Science 1. Now this was the first taste I had of computer science. We learned the absolute basics of computer science while using Python. We learned about variables, loops, conditionals, and functions. I had taken AP Computer Science in high school, so I was already kind of familiar with the basics, and that actually became important because the professor for this class, it was his first semester teaching, and he was also a grad student doing research at the same time. So his class structure, or his schedule at least, was not very structured. That kind of reflected in the lesson plans, and there was a lot of students that felt like they were struggling to stay afloat. It wasn't amazing, but it has since changed. It has become more standardized across the whole computer science department. All of the introduction computer science classes are taught by some of the top faculty in the program who are really smart and have a lot of time to answer questions. Also, I don't want it to sound like I'm really blaming the professor. It was kind of just how it worked out. I'm sure he was extremely busy and he could only give so much time while also doing what he was supposed to be doing as a student. That's kind of how it worked. After this came interterm, which for those of you who aren't familiar, it's kind of like a January term that some other schools have. Basically, you just take one class or up to 4 credits. It's an optional term, so you don't have to take it, and usually you just take one 3-credit class. But in the case of this interterm, for my freshman year, I took a 3-credit class and a 1-credit class. And I took Asian history and film, and an experimental computer science course that was just C++ programming. It wasn't that interesting. Well, it wasn't that important. Then for my spring semester freshman year, I took Seminar in Rhetoric and Writing, which I have no memory of, Single Variable Calculus 1, Elementary Spanish 2. Now for Spanish 2, it was the second part of my language inquiry, but for those of you who've been paying attention, you're probably wondering where the first part of the inquiry was. Well, at Chapman you can take a placement exam for language inquiries if you've already taken some language, so if you took Spanish in high school like I did. And the short, funny story with this is that it was an exam that I was taking in my dorm, and I made sure to make that clear to my roommate, who was also in the room at the time of me taking this exam. But on 4 separate occasions, he tried to start a conversation with me while I was taking the exam. And you want to guess how many points I missed testing into Spanish 3 by? 4. 4! I don't blame him. It was just kind of a funny thing to happen. I'm sure it was me actually not knowing enough Spanish to test into Spanish 3. It was just funny that it was like the exact same amount. Then I took Computer Science 2. This was another great class. It was kind of a continuation of Computer Science 1, but it was taught in Java instead of Python. So we learned about classes and objects and object-oriented programming. AP Computer Science was taught in Java, so I already had a really strong grasp of the language, and I felt totally at home in this class. And lastly, I took Social and Ethical Issues in Computing. And that was the end of my first year, and it was really great. I learned a lot about being a college student. I was a lot more familiar with how to make use of the various resources that were provided to me, so like study sessions and TAs and stuff like that, and it really felt like I was getting a better grasp of what it was like to be a college student. For the fall semester of my second year, I took Visual Programming. So I feel like I cheated a little bit with this class. Normally you would learn about C# and WinForms, which is ironic because I would benefit if I knew a little bit more about WinForms in my job, at least at the time of filming this video. But oh well. For the section that I enrolled in though, the professor was actually a game dev professor, which I knew because I declared my game dev minor the semester before. So he taught it using Unity, which is a game development software. I still learned about C#, but I was also getting game dev experience on top of the normal C# that I would have been learning anyways. Then I took Introduction to the Game Industry, Single Variable Calculus 2, General Physics 1, plus the lab. All computer science students are required to take a pair of general science classes, so bio, chem, or physics, and I chose to take physics, despite everyone telling me that it was going to be way harder than bio or chem, because I felt the strongest in physics in high school, and I felt like it was the most relevant to my major. And to finish it off, I took Intermediate Spanish 1, also known as Spanish 3. Then for interterm this year, I took Philosophy of Helping. Going into my second semester of sophomore year, I took Level Design 1. This was my first real game dev class, and we learned about how level design can enable different things in games and make players do different things. I took Data Structures and Algorithms. Data Structures and Algorithms. It's the class that every computer science student knows, and it's the class that every technical interview relies on. If you know, you know, and if you don't know, you're gonna find out. I will say this class is taught by Renee German, who's one of my favorite professors. He's a legend in the department and he's beloved by everyone. But don't tell him I said that. Then I took Introduction to Film Aesthetics, Discrete Math, and General Physics 2, plus a lab. Now, my third year at Chapman. This was the year when I really got into more computer science classes because I finished most of my GEs and had a lot more space to take the computer science classes. This was also the first semester that part of the Fowler School of Engineering building was open, so we got to start taking classes in there, and it is a beautiful building. Like, I love that building, and it definitely boosted productivity for me, so that was good too. During this semester, I took Assembly. This class, along with 2 other classes, are taught by this adorable old man, the other classes being Digital Logic and Computer Architecture. I feel like he was hired a long time ago, and then no one really ever checked on him because the material in Assembly and the material in Digital Logic and Computer Architecture are all like 80% related, so it's kind of just like almost like taking the same class 3 times, which is fine because there's new information in each class, but it felt a little bit silly to kind of relearn the same thing 3 times. I took Level Design 2, Programming Languages. This class was very hard, but for the parts that I understood, it was interesting. We learned about what makes a programming language and how different programming languages relate to each other. Then I took Human-Computer Interaction. This was a super cool elective because we discussed how technologies are designed, and because of the research that the professor was doing at the time, how technology and devices are designed for people with disabilities. It was kind of the first time I was forced to think about why we design things the way that we design them, which I think is pretty cool. And lastly, I took multivariable calculus. Now for interterm this year, I took a travel course, which is different from study abroad. Study abroad's for a full semester. Travel courses for interterm, and it's usually like 2 of the 4 weeks. The class that I took is called Religion and Gender in Harry Potter, and we got to go to London for 2 weeks. We got to see all of the relevant places to the books and the movies, which was fascinating. I think I could make a whole video about just this class, so if you want to see a video about that, leave a comment below. And actually, if you want me to talk about any of the classes I talk about in this video, leave a comment and I'll make sure to go into more detail about it. Then for my second semester of my junior year, I took digital logic, which also had a lab, data communication and computer networks. I kind of have mixed feelings about this class because firstly, it was a lot of information to retain and I struggled with that. We learned how networks operate and how data is transferred between networks, but I would have loved if they had taken a more practical approach with it and taught us like web development, because you can still teach a lot of that networking stuff, but we would also have a skill set that would be useful going into the workforce. Then I took compiler construction. Compiler construction was kind of a continuation of programming languages, which means that it was also kind of interesting, but it was also quite hard. We learned about how a compiler can take high-level code and make it readable for a computer. I took linear algebra, and then lastly I took database management. I really, really loved this class. Part of the reason why I love it is because it was another class that was taught by Renee, but it was also upper division, so everyone in the class had already taken at least one class with Renee, so we were all really like friendly. It was more friend teaching friend rather than professor teaching student. But I also really loved it because it was the first like topic that I had covered that I kind of felt like I was like obsessed with. Like I liked all the stuff that I had learned up to this point, but databases was like fascinating to me. We also got to use Java and Python for this class, which was cool. I even pushed myself for the final project to use Flask, which is a web framework that I had not even heard of until taking that class. But yeah, I really love databases. And it was kind of the reason I decided I wanted to do back-end development, which I wouldn't say I'm necessarily doing right now, but I think going forward that probably is the type of role that I will be in. Now, for my 4th and final year at Chapman, this is when my schedule got a little bit weird for more than one reason. But if you've seen my other videos, you kind of already know how the schedule works, so I'll speed through this. I only took 4 classes this semester because in addition to the ones that I was taking, I only needed 1 required course and 1 elective, and the required course I could only take in the spring semester, so I had to save that one, and the elective I just decided to take over interterm rather than during the semester. For the first semester, I took game development, computer architecture, topics in computer science. There's a lot of different topics that topics in computer science cover, but for this semester it was embedded systems, which was kind of convenient because the information I learned in embedded systems was relevant to the other class that I took, which was operating systems. They both had their own separate sets of large amount of information to learn, but they also shared a lot, which was convenient. The elective I took over interterm was cybersecurity, and it was a super interesting class, and I'm glad that I took it. Probably not a field that I'll go into, but one that I enjoy learning about. And then for my final semester at Chapman, I only took collaborative game development, which is basically the second part of a 2-semester capstone pair of classes for the game dev minor. But this semester was also like the first half of 2020, so you know how that went. My class turned into meeting with my team on Discord like once a week, and that was pretty much it. And that concludes all the classes I took while I was a student at Chapman. Now before we end the video, I quickly want to run through the current requirements for Chapman computer science students, so let's go do that. Okay, here we are at my computer. Very quickly, please ignore the large headphones around my neck. This is the only microphone I can use that works with my desktop computer. Hopefully it doesn't bother you too much. I think it sounds good, so hopefully that's nice. So if you look over here, I have the Chapman course catalog, which is a very useful resource for anyone trying to figure out what classes they need to take. And just kind of lays out everything that's required for the specific major. So like we talked about before, we have the FFC grand challenges in science and engineering. I guess that's slightly different than the grand challenges initiative, which is the 3 1-credit classes that you take following the FFC. Then if we come down to lower division core requirements, the first class you see is Engineering 101, Foundations of Design and Fabrication, which is different from what I had because we didn't have any engineering classes at all because there was no engineering school. So that's new and that's different. And I've heard that it's a really cool class. You get to do a lot of like design and fabrication. You get to use like the 3D printers and stuff like, and the resin printers, which are cool. I'm jealous. I wish I could take this class. And then you go on and you have Introduction to Linear Algebra and Differential Equations, which is, I think, the new linear algebra, which is the one that I took. Pretty sure it's still linear algebra. And then we have Computer Science 1 and Computer Science 2, and then Discrete Math. So those are all pretty much the same. And then when I was a student, we didn't have an option in terms of math. It was just single variable calculus 1 and 2, and then multivariable plus discrete and linear algebra. But now you also have the option to take accelerated calculus part 1, differentiation and integration, and then part 2, series differential equations and multivariable calculus. But notice that these are 4-credit classes, so you definitely will spend more time on them. I know nothing about these classes, so I don't know how hard they are compared to the single variable calc 1, 2, and multivariable. My personal opinion would be, so like normally you would take 5 classes in a semester, and that would be like your 120 credits probably if you take just 5 3-credit classes every semester. So if you're going to take 4 credits in a semester, then maybe opt for the accelerated, or if you're just trying to get through the math quicker. But it's definitely going to be more work because it is more credits. But again, I have no idea. Then if we move on, you can see the general science requirements, which is like I was talking about. You can take bio, and there's 2 options for that. You can take chem, and then physics, which is what I took. And then you have a colloquium requirement, which is really interesting because it's 6 1-credit classes, which seems like it would be annoying. But they're 1-credit classes, so it's probably like once a week or something like that. And I think it's kind of like the topics elective, but it's not because I think they also offer the topics elective. So it's different, but the same, you know? And then, so upper division requirements. We have digital logic plus the lab, same as me. Data structures, it's never going away. Computer architecture, same as me. Data communications, the same. Programming languages, operating systems. Algorithm analysis, that is new as a requirement. When I was enrolled, I think that was an elective, and I think it's a continuation of data structures and algorithms, which is cool. I think it's probably a very useful class, and I'm kind of glad that they've made it a requirement now. But I think when I was enrolled, it just like wasn't offered very often, or I just never got a chance to take it. And then database management, which you know that I love. And then let's see, in terms of electives, okay, we did it. You graduated. Good job. If you like this video, I would appreciate if you would give it a like. I spent a lot more time on this video than I have on previous videos. Like I even made a script and everything. And I'd like to be able to grow this channel a little bit. So maybe if you really like this video, you might like my other videos, and maybe you'll consider subscribing. But regardless, I appreciate you watching till the end, and I'll see you in another video.